The new 17.3 TFT patch has completely shaken up the meta. System changes, balance to a bunch of traits and units, and they completely reinvented Morgana to become a 5-cost carry to a 4-cost tank. And now instead of focusing on 1-cost reroll and playing for AD, now it's a full-blown AP meta. If you're confused, don't worry, we got you. Let's jump into the TFT Academy tier list and find out what's on top and how do we play them. Hey guys, we here at TFT Academy have been developing an app overlay for the past year. It's a desktop overlay for TFT that you can download right now. The first big feature that every TFT player needs is access to your own VODs. Every important relevant part of the game will be recorded so you can jump and skip through without a beat. And if you're going over it with a friend or a coach, you can even draw over and telestrate. We also have a comprehensive team planner. You can quickly add and remove champions by left and right clicking. You can also customize your roll down. If you only want a 2-star copy of this champion, it'll automatically hide for you when you find your 3rd copy. However, the marker will stay if you click it to be a 3-star. The team builder in TFT currently only allows you to select 10. We allow you to select up to 20. And of course, it's everything else that you expect out of an overlay. We make recommendations based on your artifacts, your augments, and your items. You'll have access to everything like usual TFT Academy, but with so many more powerful tools. And it's just the beginning. We're going to be adding way more features. So hop on over and check out TFT Academy/overlay and download today. Tip number 1 that I want to bring for you guys this patch is to think about how AP dominates the meta. If you type things like Jewel Gauntlet, it's going to light up most of the tier list, and that also applies to Death Cap as well. And if you even want more application of it, it's also things like Nash's Tooth. Because so many AP champions are going to be prominent, you should be thinking more about slamming things like Dragon's Claw and how to beat the AP champions. Not only that, you yourself should be thinking about how to play into AP because they have a lot more flexible lines. With the buffs to Aurelion Sol, Karma, LeBlanc, and even Nami, a lot of the AP champions at 4-cost is going to be really good. So it's going to be an AP 4-cost dominated meta. That doesn't mean that 4-cost AD doesn't exist. We're going to talk about why Corki, Riven, and Mastery are still playable, but for the most part, you should be defaulting to a 4-cost AP line if you can. The second thing is do not play these garbage 1-cost rerolls. They got over-nerfed, and they are a lot worse now. And the only ones that you should be playing are, well, you guessed it, the unnerfed AP ones. Veigar and Lissandra are kind of playable if you have the good setup for them, but unless you have a really good rolling star specifically for either of them, I default to a 4-cost reroll line. So no 1-cost reroll. And my third tip is going to go back to the basics. Take an econ augment if you can at the beginning of the game, or find a way to get some econ going in any way possible. The reason for this is because in a 4-cost meta, they are more expensive, and even though they did introduce Morgana as a 4-cost tank, it is still going to be a highly expensive composition because most of these 4-cost lines that you can see plays for 3 to 4 4-cost. So you need to have the econ to hit all of them, especially if you're contested. So try to focus on taking those econ augments early. That way you feel like you have all the comfort room that you can hit your composition and roll on forward. Okay, let's jump into the tier list and figure out what to play. Let's start off with a must-know composition that everyone should know how to play, Meeple Corki Riven. This composition did not get nerfed, and previously, it was already one of the best compositions to play. The main conditions for the line are whether or not you can get Deathblade for Corki, and having 3 true tank items for Rammus. A common mistake that people were doing last patch was they were going for Sunfire and Even Shroud and utility items on Rammus, but you really want to build a lot of Vest items on him because he scales with the resistances. And he's really good with pretty much any combination of vests, whether it's Stoneplate, Crown Guard, Vow, Bramble, etc. The most common setup that you'll start with is some kind of Primordian or Timebreaker and slam those AD items, preferably Last Whisper and Deathblade, and then start making those frontline items for Corki. Riven just takes whatever leftover AD items you can get. The thing about Riven is that she defaults to being ability power if you don't get sword items onto her. And even if you get a Bloodthirster, it still gives the same amount of physical and magic damage. You see that 15-15. That means that Riven will stay AP. So the most important item for her usually is a Stargazer Xayah or an Infinity Edge, so that way it can tilt her more to the AD line. But just make sure that you're consistent with the Riven items. If you build the Stargazer Xayah, don't put like a Death Cap on her. Just make sure that you have either all AD items, or if you're stuck with a bunch of AP items, you give Riven the AP items. However, that being said, one really underrated aspect of this composition is Milio. Milio 2 is actually quite solid with items. There's been situations where I cannot find Riven, and I have 1 copy at best, but I have a 2-star Milio, and I have things like Red Buff and Morello. I don't want to put that on Corki, so I have Corki hold the AD items, and I have Milio 2 hold Shojin, Deathcap, and Morello. And Milio 2 actually sometimes is comparable to a Corki in a lot of fights. So just keep in mind, don't sleep on Milio 2. If you have extra items for this composition, it's quite good, which is why our first augment priority is to take a bunch of items. You can actually use 4 full sets of items, and if you get extras, just throw them either on frontline, like the mech, or Fizz, who got buffed, you can just give him like a random Thieves Gloves. Speaking of the rest of the composition, you don't want to actually play around Bard too much until you get to level 9. I think one question that's very often asked is, should I play Bard over like the Meepsy and the Mech? That way I can play Bard with the Meeple effect. And the answer is no. You actually want to play around 5 Meeple as the main core with specifically these 8 units because of how tightly synergized it is with around their traits. And the other thing too about this composition is that Meeple Emblem is actually not that strong for it. If you look at the Corki, Riven, Rammus stats and you sort by the best performing emblems, it's actually much better with things like Voyager and Rogue than is with Meeple. And that's because the 7 Meeple is not that meaningful of a breakpoint for the composition. And it also forces you into some weird stuff where if you have the Meeple emblem, you feel like you have to drop, you know, this Mighty Mech, for example, to play 7 Meeple to get value. And that might bait you into bad boards. The only good emblems I think for this composition are Rogue and Voyager. And specifically, you would put Rogue onto the Corki, and I believe Voyager onto the Riven. At 9, if you play Bard, make sure you take out Poppy and play the Shen, and then that'll be your composition. So congrats for your free LP. And then in terms of the positioning, we put Riven in the back, so that way we had the melee carries and other units wrap around Rammus. So that way Riven can dash past these units and sometimes get to the back line. You'll just be surprised how often if you 4-throw your Riven, how she just dances and kills units over here and then gets to the back line. If you do have a spatula, one of the compositions that most people try to force as their #1 priority is Darkstar Flex. Darkstar is a very good offensive emblem. It gives AD and AP, and so you want to naturally put it on a carry. The most common usage of it in the mid game is to put it on Riven because you're trying to play around Kaisa as the main AD carry. They did buff Karma, so you could play an AP version of Darkstar, and actually we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a sec because Aurelion Sol is also an insane Darkstar holder. That'll be later mentioned in this tier list. But for now, if you're just going to be playing the traditional version of Darkstar, you usually put a bunch of AD items on Kaisa, and then eventually when you hit Jin 2, you have items either move over to Jin and split between Jin, Kaisa. The Darkstar emblem is best on Bard in the late stage of the game, but you have so many options of whoever's a carry that just fits your traits. So we mentioned Aurelion Sol being one of them, Riven being another. If you get Nami and you're playing the AP flex variation, you could put, you know, Darkstar, Jewel Gauntlets, Nashor's Nami, and have her pop off. You can also put it on a bunch of temporary holders. You know, if you have, instead of hitting, you know, Riven, you can play Gwen. If you hit a Xayah, you can play snipers with Jin. So there's a lot of flexibility around it. And then in terms of your frontline is always going to change because sometimes Tahm Kench is not going to be available and you can only hit Mech and Nunu. Or maybe Nunu and Mech are not available because everyone's playing Vanguards. You have to play like Tahm Kench and then Meepsy Alawi, right? These are also different structures you can play around if you can't hit it. But because mini black holes give you so much HP with just providing frontline, you don't actually have to prioritize frontline nearly as much. There's been instances where I've seen Darkstar take defensive combat augments, line up makeshift armor, which buffs these black holes, boxing lessons, things like that. Then only go, you know, 1 or 2 items on the Nunu 2 and then prioritize all their damage items. That's actually fine because Darkstar wants to end the fight quickly with so much upfront stats and just overwhelming. The general rule, by the way, is that Jin 2 is better than Kaisa 2, but Kaisa 2 is definitely better than Jin 1. So if you high roll Jin, either on level 7 or level 8, try not to rush too much to itemize Jin and make him the supermassive. The supermassive is whoever's the strongest with holding the most items and the most recently played. So if you have 3 items on Kaisa, 3 items on Jin, whoever is the most recently fielded onto combat will be the one that's chosen for the black hole. So just bench the Kaisa and then re-bench it. So that way she always gets priority. You'll see some streamers do that from time to time, just to double check so they don't mess up by accident. The thing about Darkstar is that you do want to play from tempo. I think Lose Streak Darkstar is really sketchy because the composition wants to roll on 8, but ultimately get to 9 and cap around Jin. So if you're in a situation where you're behind, Darkstar can be kind of hit or miss because you're just not stable enough to sack stage 4 to get to 9. So in a way, even though it's like 4 cost fast 8, it has a little bit of elements of wanting to fast 9 as well, because 6 Darkstar Djinn is where you really want to cap, as opposed to the Darkstar emblem with Lissandra. I do get asked pretty often, can you play Darkstar without the emblem? And you can. It's just that you have to be really, really far ahead. Absolutely cannot be behind in tempo and loose streaking. You must be win streaking, oftentimes with like an early Kaisa and a setup like this. The last of the S tier comps that we have is Vex Fast 9, and there's a couple different variations, but the one that's most prominent is playing around Vanguards and all the 5-cost AP backliners that got buffed. Sona got buffed this patch, Karma got buffed this patch, Nunu got rebuffed this patch. So there's a lot of good things about this package that work a lot better. And this is also a really strong way to cap the LeBlanc board, right? If you're going to start off with Rageblade and like Nunu Vanguards, the way you ultimately want to cap with the board is Vex. If you're playing LeBlanc and you're stuck on level 8, you're probably going to be playing for top 4. But this Vex board is ultimately the way that you can win the game if you find yourself in a situation with that Rageblade AP setup and you can get to level 9. The other variation of Vex that plays around Akali and Aatrox to give you free shred with Nova and then just play around Graves is still very good and actually potentially even better than this version. But it's just way more expensive because you need to stabilize around Graves and have a bunch of HP to scale him up. His ceiling is much higher. But I think this is just way more stable and on average will still win you a good amount of games. Vex is the main carry, but itemize whoever you're more likely to 2-star. If you're stuck on Karma 1 and Sona 2 is your high roll, just play Sona with items. Same thing with Bard. Same thing with Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank 2 with items is the ultimate way that you cap this Vanguard version of it. If you see a solo frontline, let's say, for example, people are playing like, you know, a solo frontline reroll composition with 1 tank with stone plates, just put the Blitzcrank in front of it to make sure that you can remove it so that way you can push towards the back line and deal a ton of damage. Other than that, this is pretty much just a straightforward win streak stage 2 and stage 3, sacrifice stage 4 rounds while using Time Breaker and trying to farm a bunch of rerolls and get a bunch of econ and get to level 9. Or if you're just, you know, rolling and high rolling your LeBlanc setup and pushing 9, just cap around Vex. Let's hop into the A tier and start off with Aurelion Sol. Just want to note that all the A tier compositions actually are quite strong and could compete with the S tier, but they are slightly more conditional or slightly weaker on the average baseline. Aurelion Sol, however, is one of the exceptions. I think Aurelion Sol has a very high ceiling, and I think that the interesting thing about ASOL right now, at least at the time of this video, is that there's no established board that people are playing every single game. It's a very flexible core of playing Aurelion Sol, Karma, Mordekaiser, and then flexing in any kind of Vanguard for that Mordekaiser. And you basically get this nice little core of Conduit, Voyager, and Darkstar, which can go in a bunch of different things. The first important thing about ASOL is do not mech form ASOL. They buff the base damage of the Death Beam so high that you no longer want to transform ASOL in these kinds of ASOL flexes. I think the most consistent version based on the stats and from my own experience playing the patch so far is to try to go for Vanguard ASOL because it's just like an easy build-up. You just start off with Zoe and Arbiters. You have Leona hold tank items. Maybe you have, you know, Arbiter print some resources or just win you a lot of fights, and then Zoe can hold the items as a conduit 1-to-1. It's a very nice build-up. But there are other versions that you can play. You can play a Psionic version because Psionic items can actually go on Aurelion Sol, which is okay. And you can have Gragas, for example, tied to Tom Kench. And that's a replacement for Nunu and Blitzcrank because it's really hard to hit sometimes like Nunu and Blitzcrank, especially in this meta. So you might not get it. You can just take out both of those Vanguards, play 2 Bruisers. Psionic ties to not just Sona, but also Pike. Pike is a Voyager that connects to Karma. So you're starting to see like one angle of there. Another angle you can play the Mighty Mech, lean more into Voyagers. You can transform the mech, turn them into a little bit like the mech of old with, you know, stone plates instead, and have that be your primary tank. And then solo frontline it and play, you know, mech and the Aurelion Sol and Karma, almost kind of like this version basically, but just, you know, play Fiora. Instead of Fiora, you play Akali and Maokai, and you get some cheap damage, but you don't actually transform Aurelion Sol. Another package that you could play is Morgana and Ross because those units don't really have traits, so you can just splash them in and get some easy frontline upgrades. So there's a lot of different ways that you can play it, but the most important thing is that you get to 9 off of Aurelion Sol 2 in frontline and play for Bard and Sona. Bard and Sona are very good endgame comps to these AP boards. not just these, Vanguard Vex boards, but also Aurelion Sol. That's ultimately how you push for the win. Play this line if you have the opener with the Vanguards and the Zoes and things like that, and you can slam good items. Aurelion Sol is a conduit, so you don't actually want mana items. That might be a misconception. Don't slam Shojin and blue buff. Conduit gives enough mana. Go pure damage on Asol so that way he can cast and one-shot everything. The one thing I do want to shout out is Darkstar Emblem on Asol into 6 Darkstar is extremely good. I think we even wrote a note. Darkstar Asol equals pivot towards 6 Darkstar. It is very explosive. But you have to keep in mind that that board, again, is a little bit hard to stabilize because it's very expensive on 8. So you might need a lot of econ in order to hit it. Mastery Marauders, AK Marauders and Brawlers, is still really good in the stats. It did get nerfed, though. Mastery lost a little Omnivamp. Edge of Night heals a little bit less. And Marauders does a little bit less damage. So all that just adds up over time. And Mastery now feels like you need to have a little extra something to play it, as opposed to the previous patch where you could just jam Edge of Night and Giant Slayer and Quicksilver and it was totally fine. The ideal item is Malware Matrix. That is definitely one of the signs to play Mastery. Or if you have like a really good augment for it, things like Group Hug is still really powerful. Kahuna Huna got nerfed, but that augment was just overperforming, still probably okay. So just having one thing that's conditionally good for Mastery is important. The nice thing about Mastery nerfs, though, is that it's pretty uncontested. Most people are just, spam contesting Corki Riven. So if that ends up happening, it's a pretty easy sword play into Mastery. Still a fine comp, just not going to steamroll and bull over everything like it did in the previous patch. The big thing about this composition that I like is that emblems are still quite solid for it. Mastery is good, really good with Brawler still, and you play 6 Brawler. Marauder Emblem is fine. Challenger Emblem is okay. You can still use Nova, even though it's not great. There's just like a lot of different things you could do with it that's not that bad, but it's definitely worse. And the opener also got nerfed as well, Primordians, which the reroll version of Primordians is all the way at the bottom at the moment. So we aren't really recommending playing into Primordians. So if you get a Primordian opener, you're pretty much going to be thinking about Mastery or Corki Riven. Mastery wants to be on the top left side. I saw a Reddit thread asking why Mastery's win rate is a little bit higher in the top left versus the top right. And I actually responded to that. The left is significantly better than the right side because in the melee mirror match versus another Yi, for example, the opposing Yi will always be forced to attack your tank. In this case, this Yi will always attack this Yi because it can't reach the Tom Kench on the other side, versus their melee unit will always attack your side because of the tank roll revamp and force them to take that 50-50. Just want to make a note of that, especially if you're thinking about placing hexes like Yasuo in specific spots. It's not ideal for this composition, but it's still something to think about. Lulu Reroll is a composition that I actually personally rate very highly. If I get a good spot to play Lulu Reroll, I'm almost always going for it. I personally really like Mountain Lulu the most. I think Medallion's okay. And then they did buff things like Fountain and reintroduce it. Not entirely sold on it personally. They nerfed Serpent Lulu, so it's a little bit worse. But yes, I would recommend playing it on Mountain, especially if you get it early, and Medallion specifically on this composition. A couple of ways to approach playing this composition, which makes it interesting to me. One, you can roll on level 6 because we found out that Milio is insane this composition. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise. We talked about it with Corki Riven, but Milio is actually kind of a crank. And so if you go for Milio 3 and you have the Fate Weaver and you get like actual AP items on him, a lot of times you end up giving Morello and utility to him because you want 2 tank items on your front line. But let's say you're in a situation where you can go for like pure damage on Milio. He can actually even out damage Lulu for a while. So you have people who roll on 6 and they go for Jax 3 who got nerfed but is still fine, or Pantheon 3, or you can roll on 7, and that largely depends on what your econ engine is. If you had something like Y spending, right, or EXP gain like Patient Study or Slammin', you want to probably start rolling on 6 because those EXP things are going to naturally push you to 7, and 6 odds are still good to roll for these 2 costs while picking up some 3 costs. If you're in a situation where you're trying to lose streak really hard and you're losing 8 rounds with calculated loss or savings account, patience is a virtue. You're probably going to lose all of stage 2 and part of stage 3. After the God Realm encounter at 3-5, you are probably going to all in and roll for 2-star Lulu, 2-star Maokai, 2-star Jax, and probably roll from like level 7, 60 gold down to like 30, 20, and then stabilize on 2 stars, and then econ back up, then finish rolling for all your 3 stars in stage 4. So you're going to be playing for a level 7 stabilization at that point. So there's multiple ways you can play the composition, which is what I really like. Lulu's also very BIS dependent. You really want Nashers and Jewel Gauntlet, and specifically this like double Nashers build is quite good on her. If you have to compromise, you can go like Nashers and Shojin and Jewel Gauntlet, or like maybe Nashers Blue Buff Jewel Gauntlet. But in the late stage of the game, if you can save a remover and you find another Nashers later, you definitely want to go double Nashers on her. And that's because her crit matters a lot for how much damage she's doing with some of the Stargazers and the Replicator effect. If you get a Radiant Nashers on Lulu, it is very busted. If you look at the stats, you can see right here how much better Radiant Nashers is than the next best item. Just a much better performing Radiant. So Lulu is actually very good with things that can give you selection of Radiant items. If you have Expedition 33 or if you get Golden Gamba, those are augments that you can roll and put on Lulu, get that Radiant Nashers, and truly pop off. And if you have Radiant Nashers, you actually don't even need another Nashers too. You can just go Jewel Gauntlet plus like an actual damage item, for example, like Death Cap or Giant Slayer or whatever, because that Radiant Nashers will cover the rest of the crit that you need to get to 100%. The whole point of this build, if you don't know, is that Nashers Jewel Gauntlet gives you 100% crit. You get 25% base plus 40 with the double Nashers, plus the 35, so that's 100. So Radiant Nashers covers that and essentially allows you to build her more offensive oriented. Your tank might change every single game. Maokai 3 actually caps a little bit higher than Jax, especially after the nerf. So we probably might end up changing this to encourage you to go more towards Maokai. But the thing is, Maokai wants more HP sources, things like Steadfast and Spirit Visage and Warmogs, because his passive gives 50% more value to those items. And so Maokai actually scales better with HP items versus Jax really likes more the traditional tank items with resistances and shields and things like that. I've also tanked Pantheon 3, and he's totally okay as well. Definitely the worst of the 3 tanks, but it is what it is. Roll for this composition on 7 without Ross, and then play Ross on 8. 2 other quick tips about this. You don't need to build Shred or Sunder because you have Nova with Maokai and Aatrox. And the second thing is sometimes in the mid game, if you sense yourself winning a lot of fights or you have the HP to buffer for it, you can actually just play 3 Time Breaker instead of like this Aatrox. Let's say you have Pantheon 2 with items, or even High Roll Maokai 2. You don't really need to play the Bastion. You can just like play 3 Time Breaker and try to collect a little bit of extra gold value through EXP or rerolls. And that's something that you can do to try to get a little bit more econ, because this composition is insanely expensive. If you can get to it, it's very good. It's just very expensive. So just finding ways to get more econ is really important. Do not play this without a good source of econ. Let's dive into the B tier and start off with Darkstar Lissandra Reroll. This is the 1-cost reroll that has the most potential to actually move up to the A tier. In fact, there's a couple compositions that might move up to A tier as we continue to optimize and develop. And this one is really popular in Asia and China because they really think that 6 Darkstar is overtuned. And this is one of the only 1-cost reroll lines that didn't get nerfed. So it's one of those things that it's just by, addition to subtraction. Other things got worse, less contested. People are not picking up Lissandra for Teemo rerolls anymore. So this is maybe like one way that you can play it. If you get like a worth the wait Cho'Gath or Lissandra, definitely think about trying to play into this because it's very, very powerful. It's kind of similar to just playing like a Darkstar Flex line, except instead of trying to play around Kaisa and Jhin, you're playing around Lissandra and either around Shepherd, or you're playing around like some kind of replicator. You can have like Pantheon and Riven, for example, tie in, or Meepsy and Alawi. It's pretty open-ended. And you just want to go for big crits, because Darkstar already gives so much effective ability power that it's almost like you have multiple death caps onto her. So you just want to go for maximum crit damage and maybe some damage amp, but Voyagers give damage amp, so you got that all covered. But it plays like a standard 1-cost reroll, which is don't level up and then try to focus on your economy and then collect copies of Lissandra and Cho'Gath. Maybe if you're greedy, play a little bit Time Breaker early to get some rerolls and then just roll for Lissandra 3 and Cho'Gath 3 over time. Itemize Cho'Gath with real tank items if you can, and then duo carry someone else. Most commonly it'll be Karma, but you might duo carry Kaisa, or if you're playing like another Voyager, you might play around like Aurora or Nami or something like that. Completely flexible until you get to 6 Darkstar. Another thing about Darkstar I didn't mention previously is that we stopped putting the black holes on the edges, and that's because they are a little more fragile than some of the other tanks. You want them to absorb a lot of like the main CC and damage from a lot of the other tanks. And so putting them in the middle so that way they can be more disrupted as opposed to immediately picked off is more effective, generally speaking. So we just splash them. You don't have to copy this exact black hole pattern, but just sprinkle them, just and don't put them on the edges. Put the real tanks on the edges instead. Composition 2 is LeBlanc. This composition got buffed pretty much across the board. They buff LeBlanc, they buff Karma, they buff Nunu, they buffed the top end, they buffed AP in general. So LeBlanc is just better. This was the first composition that really took over the meta at the start of the set, where people just play a lot of Rageblade LeBlanc. The best arbor still scales LeBlanc's ability power or attack speed, so that way she can get the most combat stats. If you don't have ability power at all, give her a death cap to the Jewel Gauntlet. That's totally fine. She's also very flexible with artifacts, which I really like, so she's pretty decent with like the forges and whatnot. And this composition in general is just a lot better this patch, so definitely something to think about if you have a Rageblade opener and you are playing high tempo off of some Vanguards. And it's really nice as well, even if you gain copies of Leona, so that way you can print Leona 3 very quickly, have Leona hold items, and that might even let you skip level 8 and go to 9 if you're high rolling very, very hard. Let's say you have Leona 3, and you have LeBlanc 2, Zoe 2, and you don't really have anything else. Sometimes you're like strong enough to actually just go to level 9 and play for the Vex board and use that as your leverage to push tempo. However, I do want to highlight the other version of LeBlanc that's starting to gain a little bit of traction in the stats, which is just playing Shepherd Flex. And we do have the version that has 7 Shepherd, but according to the data, you actually can still perform pretty well with Shepherd even without the emblem. So I have in this data explorer 5 Shepherd without the Shepherd emblem, and that's actually pretty solid still. Like you can still flex it. This is sort of expecting you to hit Sona. Like if you hit Sona, that's pretty much where the most of the AVP is made up from. But if you're in a high tempo AP spot, you definitely can play for 5 Shepherd because all the units around it outside of Teemo are a lot better. If you don't have the Shepherd emblem, you just basically don't have this on Karma and you don't play Teemo. And you just play like 5 Shepherd, Voyager, 2 Vanguard, and that could be good enough. This is something to think about with aura farming. If you have like aura farming into Sona, or if you take Gilded Steel and you hit Sona, just play that. Just play that. You know, if you have ways to generate 5 cost, just play into that. Sona's a much better unit. Sona wants a lot of mana items or utility. Like I really like her with blue buff Shojin. Actually, I think her best build is like blue buff Shojin. But she could also just take like raw AP as well. Just make sure that Sona gets to her 5th cast, right? Every 5 cast, she just rips all the debris and does 100. Like she does like 1,000 or 2,000 damage. Very crazy. Just make sure she gets to those 5 casts and you're good to go. Do not sleep on Shepherds. They are very good this patch. Karma Nami is the other half of that Vanguard Voyager AP flex, although it's noticeably worse. I'm covering it now because it's kind of related to the 2 things that we just talked about, but this is basically just like playing around LeBlanc, but instead of playing LeBlanc and the full Vanguard package, you play around Nami, and you ideally get to like Blitz and Bard, but you can also play this as a flex option. So if you love AP flex, you slam Nashor's GG, you can play around Karma, you can play around Nami, you can play around Aurelion Sol if you slam Jewel Gauntlet but no Nashors. So AP, as we talked about at the very beginning of this video, is very good for flexing. So slam those AP items, and you have 2 slots that are completely open to whatever you want to do. But keep in mind that it is really important that you hit your upgraded front line. Even if you hit Nami 2, Karma 2, if your front line is 1 star, you're going to die. So make sure that you play for upgrade frontline as best as you can. Urgot Reroll did not get that much better this patch, but because there are fewer people playing Master Yi, it should be easier to hit. Urgot is mainly an artifact check as one of the conditions. Really powerful with Portable Forge, Forge and Strength, Living Forge, because he's just so much better if you can get Prowler's Claw on him, or Rapid Fire Cannon, or Fish Bones, things like that. Very, very good with it. He's also super expensive, so it's kind of hard to get to, you know, Aurora 3, Urgot 3, Maokai 3, especially if there's a Lulu player contesting you and you just can't hit that. And also, even things like the Mighty Mech are much more contested this patch, so a lot harder to get. But if you do get all these conditions online and going, Urgot 3 can still do some work. So do not sleep on him. Aurora is very powerful. A lot of people ask, can I replace Aurora with Karma 2? I think Aurora 3 is really, really huge. Mainly because the second paragraph, which is she just adds 10% damage to Urgot in an AoE. So it's really big to amplify not only just her own damage, but also Urgot's big proximity blast that can deal a ton of damage. So keep that in mind. Urgot and Aurora are very, very good for this composition. Most of the time, because of how much gold you need, this composition is almost always played from Loose Streak. You play Calculated Loss, you play Fortune Strength, you go like Prismatic Ticket, you lose 8 rounds all the way until 3-5 after the 3-5 carousel, and then you just like all in and try to stabilize on 2 stars, econ up, and then try to hit 3 stars in the middle of stage 4. You position in the corner so that way Urgot kills, and you separate their tank line. So after their tanks waddle over here to the right side, and Urgot kills the left side, he can just go up and move to the top corners. But you don't have to position like this. You can also position kind of standard like Mastery. Basically, just put Urgot where Mastery is. 1, 2, 3, 4, pop, pop, and then play the Aurora in the back corner. That's also a completely valid way to position as well. Xayah. I'm not sure how to really understand Xayah this patch because they changed the way her ability works. Now her active works for attacks as opposed to a set amount of seconds. And it looks like she is slightly worse, which is pretty disappointing because I think Xayah is a really good flex option for the game. If you stay in Rageblade, you could play LeBlanc into Vex, or you could play Xayah into Xayah Jhin. I think it's really healthy for the game, so I personally think Xayah needs a little bit of love. But she's still playable with the usuals. Boar, Serpent, and Altar are still quite good for Xayah and playable with her. You can also play Mountain if you have it snowballing early. Other than that, though, still probably not looking at playing the new Fountain based on the stats, but maybe that could change based on our optimization. This Meeple package, Gnar, Bard, and Rammus are going to be contested a lot, especially if there's going to be 2+ Corki Riven players in your lobby. So if you can't find it, you can just play anything else. You can play the new Morgana, right? We need to make her a 4 cost because things have updated today, but you can play Morgana instead. You can play 4 Vanguards. You can play 2 Bastions like Shen instead of Rammus, and then flex in other things. Very flexible. The whole point is whether or not you can stabilize on Xayah 2, Nunu 2, and get to 9 for Jhin. That's like the really big part of capping this board. Xayah is pretty much only good played from ahead. I would never lose streak into Xayah. The exception is if you can get something like Battle Buddy Crossbow. Still insane on Xayah if you go for specifically the Rageblade and Infinity Edge build on her. The reason why you want Infinity Edge is to maximize your critical strike chance when playing the Battle Buddy Crossbow, so just keep that in mind. Hydra also did get nerfed this patch, but it's still playable on Xayah in the data, so you still could play it. It's just not nearly as insane as it used to be previous patch. The most common package with Mountain is to play for, Talon with the Rogue, but I've seen people do some weird stuff. I've seen people play like the buff Samira, so they play Xayah, Samira, and then they, high roll Blitzcrank, and then they play Gwen. So now all of a sudden they have 3 Space Groove, and they're like working in that as well until they get to level 9 for Jhin and Mordekaiser. There's a lot of different ways you can slice this. You can also play around the other traits like Replicator. If you get Nami, you can do that too. Twisted Fate is also a Fate Weaver, and we mentioned that Milio is a potentially decent unit to play around. So you can play Twisted Fate and Milio and cut this Lulu, and then end up playing some Timebreaker as well because, you hit Riven and Pantheon and Tahm Kench. That's how you tie it in. Mountain is all about just the journey of, climbing the mountain and just getting to level 9 and playing on 2 or 5 cost. Very fun way to play Xayah, but you must hit it early. You must hit it early because when you get those emblems really matter. Oh, and my favorite combo to play with Mountain is also things that synergize with emblems. So Legion of Threes or Earth, things that reward you for getting more emblems. Love that. Kaisa Reroll in general is very good when you can hit, but you're just not going to hit very often. This is going to be a composition you play for when you know Kaisa is not played because there's no Darkstar players, and you know that you have the economy to hit Kaisa 3 and preferably Alawi 3. But Vanguards are going to be also contested this patch, so it's probably going to be like Ross 3 or someone else. You also can play into Kaisa Fizz. I mean, it got buffed this patch, but Fizz is also contested because people are playing it in Corki Riven. So, I don't know. I personally think that the data is kind of fake because if you play a Kaisa game, on average, you're going to be contested. But hey, you might end up in a situation where you hit Kaisa 2 really early, or you do something crazy, like you take Magic Roll or Restart Mission. You get a free Kaisa 2, 2 more Kaisa show up, 5 Kaisas. Well, I guess I'm just going to reroll Kaisa. That's perfectly fine, and Kaisa 3 is good. And the cool thing is you can play this and then cap with Darkstar, no emblem. Very similar to how you play LeBlanc, right? You play LeBlanc, you play a 4 Vanguard LeBlanc, and then you say, hey, I get to 9. I'm going to play some Vex and 5 cost. Exactly the same with Kaisa. Hey, I'm going to roll 4 Vanguard or 4 Darkstar with Kaisa. Eventually get to 9. I find Jhin. I play 6 Darkstar. And boom, you just basically play this board, but instead of Bard, you just play Lissandra. And now all of a sudden, you have Kaisa 3 on that board. That's perfectly fine. That's the way I like to play Kaisa. You really want Infinity Edge and a mana item. I think blue buff is a little bit better than Shojin, but they're pretty much the same. It's just that sometimes it's hard to get the distribution of items. So Shojin blue buff, totally fine. And Infinity Edge. And I think Giant Slayer is her best third item. A lot better than Striker's Flail because you want her to kill the tanks ASAP. Let's talk about one of the true dark horses of this patch. Diana Reroll is very similar to Urgot, where if you have a spot for it, it can actually really take over the lobby. But the conditions for it seem to be 2 things. Either you get a Vanguard emblem on her, or you get an artifact like Seeker's Arm Guard for her, as well as anything else that's really good in the stats. Looks like you want Wit's End or Seeker's Arm Guard mainly as her main conditions at the moment, but as we get more data, that might change, and we'll update the website accordingly. And you really get an Arbiter that can really scale her defensiveness, either HP or resistances. Either of these are really, really good for Diana, and you want her to be snowballing early. I actually don't think this is a good composition to play from behind, but it's kind of this weird catch-22 of like, how do you actually get into a spot where you can scale the Diana and get like the good items for her? Because it almost feels like you need to lose streak to guarantee Rageblade Titans and BT and like that kind of stuff, as well as get the permanent scaling or find the tempo and econ to play Diana. And then you throw into the fact that their best version of her is Anima, right? Playing around Aurora, Jinx, and Alawi, and then getting free Anima cash outs, which means you want to lose, but that puts you in a tougher spot. So it's a little bit of a conundrum. The reason why I'm just saying it all that is because she's very unsolved. So if you want to just try to help optimize and throw yourself into the Diana blender of trying to figure out how to make her work, be my guest. There's definitely some data that supports her being fantastic. There's also, not to try to confuse you further, but there's also some data to suggest that with Misfortune and her buffs, you can also play a challenger version of Diana with no Anima. Instead of playing Jinx and Aurora, you play towards Misfortune. You play Misfortune for Vanguard Diana. That version I'm less sold on. I personally tried it and went Super 8th, but the stats are there, and it says that that is also a semi-playable comp. All I'm saying is the dark tech of the patch. If you want to try for it, feel free to lend your LP to the cause. Donate today and help us figure out what actually is the optimal Diana lines. Let us know in the comments below. Maybe you got some Diana tech, but I think it's B tier. I don't think it's truly C tier. I think there's definitely some good moments to play it, but I just don't personally know that much about it. It actually did really well in recent tournaments and won pro lobbies as well, and that was before the buffs. So we'll see. You guys got to help me figure this one out. I'm going to move past the rest of the B and C tier. Those are really situational comps. If they're not in this video, just pretty much avoid it unless you're forced to play in it through an augment or a scenario where you can't avoid playing it whatsoever. Instead, let's talk about some of these hero augments and start off with Shield Maiden Leona. For me personally, this augment's an S tier. I think this augment blows out the lobby and tempo if you have a Leona too early with one slammable item. And she is very, very good with a handful of different arbiters as well. She's very good with resistances. I like that the most. Anything that can just give her resistances at all, as well as copies of Leona to help you push levels and cap really high around LeBlanc and AP. Because it's playing around the Vanguard Shepherd structure with Arbiter, it just naturally will cap very high. And this is actually a one-cost reroll that can win the lobby. I personally am a big fan. Click it whenever you get a chance to. And just evaluate if you need to reroll or you can push levels. You get free Leonas. Leona that prints you extra copies with Arbiter reminds me of this augment called Protagonist, where Protagonist would give you a one-cost champion and gain a copy for the rest of the game every single turn. And because it was so good, this was back in set 15, you could just guarantee a 3 or a 4-star version of that hero augment. That's kind of what happens with this Arbiter print on Leona. So I personally think that one is really good if you get a chance to play it. Gragas Self-Destruct is pretty insane if you can get to the Sympathetic Implant on 4 Psionic. Anytime you have Sympathetic Implant and 4 Psionic with it, he goes kaboom and blows everything up. Sona got buffed, and they definitely made it easier to hit mastery because he's less contested. So definitely a composition worth thinking about. It's also really good with like a Brawler Emblem, mainly because Brawler Emblem's good on mastery, but also you can fit everything on level 8, which is very nice because you kind of want 6 Brawler and 4 Psionic. Otherwise, if you don't have the Brawler Emblem, you have to go to level 9 for it. So it can be a little bit tricky. I also think that Gragas wants to be towards the center. I don't think you want him to be in the corners. Wage and Iverson has tried experimenting with it personally and told me that it's just better center. And then your duo carry is pretty flexible. Yeah, we have items on mastery, but you can also go Pike 3 if you want and just put, Infinity Edge and Hand of Justice, Edge of Night on Pike and have him carry. It's just going to be difficult because you need so many gloves and things for Gragas, so you might not get that for Pike. And Pike really wants Edge of Night. But to be fair, I guess so does Mastery. Whatever floats your boat, you can play Pike duo carry, Mastery duo carry. You could technically also play around Victor as your duo carry as well. You can play Victor with Conduit. Hey, maybe throw in the Aurelion Sol as your Conduit duo. Who knows? Have fun with it. It's very fun augment. Give it a try. Meepsy looks pretty good in the stats now as well. Ever since they buffed it, her fall off damage is a lot better now. And this is the itemization I was talking about with Pike, just like Infinity Edge, Edge of Night, and something else good for the Psionic. Meepsy really likes creating this gap in the center so that way Pike can assassinate backline. And then through the combination of Pike and Meepsy, you will kill a bunch of enemy carries in the back. So very, very good. I would be careful about clicking Meepsy though with this hero augment if you see a lot of Vanguard AP flex because all of them include Meepsy. In fact, if we just type Meepsy in here, oh my goodness, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 composition. Okay, well, no one's playing Victor. 8 compositions that might be flexing in Meepsy. It's very easy for you to be contested, so just keep that in mind that it could be hard to hit this composition. The other hero augments, Aatrox and Jax, are kind of similar because they both play around the Stargazer Reroll, like Fate Weaver, Twisted Fate type of thing, at least in the stats. They both got buffed. They look better, so just keep an eye out for them. They tank for each other, which is pretty fun. Jax tanks for Aatrox, and then, Jax, or rather Aatrox tanks for Jax. So kind of have that mix and match. Specific items are really important. And in fact, that's actually really worth noting is that pretty much all these augments, hero augments, is very item specific. So try to make sure you don't click these hero augments without swords for Aatrox, without bows for Jax, without gloves for Gragas, so on and so forth. Try not to do that. It's very, very important that you have good biss on this. And then things for the avoid, just avoid these 3 for now. Stats-wise, they are awful right now, and the eye test makes them look really badly as well. I probably could consider Terminal Velocity Poppy. This one's kind of like basically another Vagar version where you just try to tempo with 2-star and print the rest, or you reroll for a bunch of 3 stars, but I prefer to tempo. It's nothing special. You just play for your top 4 and you get out once you're getting to print the Poppy 3. Just falls off really hard late game. And there you have it. There's your tier list. Slam your AP items. If you're forced to play AD, look for Corki and Riven and play around swords. Reroll 1 cost is pretty much dead outside of Lissandra. And if you are in a spot for a 3 cost, if you're uncontested, definitely go for it. It can be very powerful. So good luck to everyone climbing out there. There will be movement in the tier list, especially as we optimized, but we want to get this out over the weekend for you guys to check out and have the ability to grind on 17.3 over the weekend with as much knowledge as possible. Make sure to download the TFT Academy overlay app as well, so that way you get all the information right at your fingertips and you don't miss a beat. That's it for this time. Peace out and good luck on the climb.